Religion is always in the room is this phrase that popped into my head when I was at CBS. And I thought that, given the last 14 months that it needed a slight tweak, at least for this discussion. So here we are. Sorry. Okay. So I want to take us all back to January 2020, which seems like 10 years ago. I was fortunate enough to collaborate with our very own Kevin Healy. And we looked at the exercise that he likes to use in his contemplative media studies class. He calls it the College Woods exercise. And I wrote an article about it for Tricycle. So just a gentle reminder about what happens. Kevin hands his students a manila envelope with the instructions to go into the College Woods at University of New Hampshire. And students find a quiet spot to settle in. And while they're doing so, they're thinking about class discussions and readings about detoxing from tech devices. And they're also reconnecting with nature. So they then open their manila envelopes, and within they find a photograph with the distressing news event. And the instructions in the envelope say, be with this image, see what comes up for you, notice where the image is coming from, and there you go. And it's an actual contemplative practice called beholding. So the idea is to encourage students to pause and think more deeply about the latest news alert that popped up on their screen. So one of the things that Kevin said, which I thought was quite important, was he doesn't want students to actually reject technology outright, but to be more intentional in how they use it. I want them to slow down enough to see who or what is in the photograph and then ask themselves, how does it make me feel? So the exercise seemed to garner some results from his students. And I actually think that now that we're working towards reentry and in class, hopefully in person in the fall, that I think it would be really interesting to hear from him at that point about how students respond to the exercise post Zoom fatigue. Then, of course, we know what happens next, right? Cancel everything. We all go into quarantine. And I, of course, live in New York City, and it was the epicenter early on. And it was indeed very, very strange to be living in a city where there was suddenly no one on the streets, and all you could hear were the wail of sirens at any time of the day. So here I am. I'm in my master control here. That's my cat, Harry. And, we're in our own little private universe. And in the moment, of course, it was very difficult to think coherently about what all of this meant. But invariably, I started to think about the communities that I report on. And as everyone and everything started to shift online, I just sort of started to follow them in their movements. And so I actually decided to focus specifically on Buddhist communities because I knew that a lot of my religion reporter friends would be handling other faith traditions. So I pitched a story to Tricycle, and it was looking at digital sanghas. And so one of the places that I found was a very well-established virtual dojo in Japan called Tree Leaf Zendo. And the Zen priest there, it was based in Tokyo. And he actually had been offering Zazen and other ritual practices online for close to 12 years. And so he said something rather poignant, which was, you have to teach people in their heart to drop the thought of distance, which is what happens when we log onto a device, that sense of distance. Also in this report, or in this story, I connected with Roshi Joan Halifax with the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe. And surprisingly, they did not have they weren't fitted out for any sort of electronic connection. So they really had to scramble when everyone went online. And it was interesting to see the kinds of things that they had to accommodate for. They had to increase their bandwidth with the local cable service provider. They had to install definition cameras into the Zendo. And this was all to accommodate programming that was supposed to be in person, but was now online. And it had never occurred to them to actually do this before the pandemic. And they're actually going to keep everything up and running because they find that it's a great way for them to sort of stay connected to their wider community. And it's great for spiritual tourism if you're into that. One thing that Roshi Halifax said to me was maybe some people would find it a Dharma door and others might find it weird, and bless them both. But online practice is not for everybody. And I know that many of us who are sitting in the room or at a distance miss the warm hand-to-hand and face-to-face connections. This kind of intimacy is a really important part of Zen. So then in May, I was commissioned by Tricycle to report on Buddhists with physical disabilities and how they access digital sanghas from anywhere in the world at any time of the day. And so this online shift was actually made it very easy for people with physical disabilities to sort of log in, but it also revealed where the Buddhist community generally falls short. And I have to say, I was really grateful for this opportunity to talk about this community because I had a blind spot in my reporting. I didn't really think about people with physical disabilities, and we all know how much reporters love to learn about their blind spots. So it was just a really informative, not just to do the reporting, but just personally. So in general, before COVID-19, people with disabilities who wanted to attend a meditation class or Dharma talk would often have to navigate older buildings with limited wheelchair access, for instance. And there was also the added physical and mental stress of getting to the actual site. The move to online was a net gain, of course. But then there are always drawbacks. One of which is that meditation apps are often inaccessible because there are no transcripts. Online videos often lack closed captioning, and live online events may not have an American Sign Language interpreter. So one of the great things I discovered in my research for this was this community, No Barrier Zen. And it's a Soto Zen temple based in Washington, D.C. And Ocean Liam Jennings is a deaf Zen monk. He created the Zen meditation group with the intention to work more intelligently with communities of differently abled people. And he happens to be one of the few deaf Zen monks in the world. So No Barrier Zen is not just for the deaf or the disabled, but the services are organized in order to accommodate those communities. So before the pandemic, Jennings experimented with technology in this really interesting way. I mean, it's interesting if you don't think about this community much, so it was interesting to me. In that he was using technology as a means to educate a wider audience. And he created these short YouTube videos in 2017, which were an online American Sign Language dictionary of Buddhist terms. And so I wanted to include one example because I think it's just so great. Sorry. What I love about that is that it provides another way to access the Dharma. During my reporting on the group, I attended Zazen, and they always had an ASL interpreter as part of the Zoom, and so I could follow along. But one thing that I thought was very moving was at the end, they would all sign the 4 Bodhisattva vows. And again, it was very interesting to see the Dharma expressed this way. And so I have a version of it that Jennings created again on his YouTube channel. So this is, just wanted you to see this. There you go, your moment of Zen. So moving on from here, I started to write for the print version of Tricycle, and here's the cover of the spring 2021 issue, and seems rather on point. So they asked me to write an article about what Buddhist centers and sanghas were going to do once the vaccine was readily available. And they also wanted to hear how these communities were actually handling the transition to online 12 months in. So I actually love the headline, Lockdown Dharma, which, we don't get to choose our headlines, so it was sort of fun. Anyway, I connected with the Seattle Betsuin Buddhist Temple, which is in Seattle. It's a 120-year-old Jodo Shinsu community that grew adept at creating a virtual presence through its YouTube channel. And it's a community that has a lot of older members, and it was the older members who obviously felt the loss of connection the most during lockdown, since they weren't as adept at navigating technology. So the temple actually started a Minds of Masters talk show, which featured local Jodo Shinsu clergy, which I thought was rather clever. And then the other thing they did was during the annual Obon Festival, which was one of these really beloved community festivals that everyone in this town of Seattle, city of Seattle, enjoyed attending, they created a virtual one. And when the Japanese Buddhists, so the Obon Festival is when Japanese Buddhists honor their deceased ancestors. So the temple produced a virtual memorial service with ritual chanting and incorporating footage of 6 different cemetery sites in the area. So I wanted to give you a little sample of what they did, because it's also quite moving.
Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda, 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 Namanda.
So invariably, these online offerings become these cross-generational collaborations between the older members of a Sangha and the digital natives who are able to navigate the technology quite easily. Moving on, I spent a lot of this summer online, like everyone did, but I was on Instagram a lot, and I discovered a woman by the name of Levon Proverbs Briggs, and she created something called the Proverbial Experience, which is a gathering that happens on Sunday morning on Instagram Live. And it's an Instagram church of sorts. So I pitched the story to Religion News Service, and they said yes. And so the pastor, Levon Briggs here, as you see here, the service feels not unlike the Black Episcopal Church that she grew up in, but it has a twist. Briggs incorporates African religious practices into the service. And this is very much in line with what Margarita's work is about, looking at Africana in the digital world. Briggs says, "I am not your mama's preacher. I honor the great rituals of my childhood faith, but now that I have decolonized my religion, I have a duty and an obligation to present our ancestral wisdom and indigenous spiritual practices in a way that is fully integrated with who I am." So I wanted you, I have a little bit of the service that I wanted to share with you, because there's so much going on here that I could talk for an hour on it. But I mean, just even the way she uses the verticality of the space, but I'll let you see for yourself.
If you have never poured libation before, we respond by saying Ashe, which means, and it is so. Essentially, it's an African amen. So I invite you to say Ashe where you are, type it in the comments. I also invite you to say the names of ancestors that you want to be in this space. You can also type those in the comments on Instagram. All right, let's go. Did I see somebody say something humble? We are not humble at the proverbial experience. So here by Asia, I see you, honey. And there's nothing humble about you. When you look up humility and humble, it means to think lowly of yourself, to debase yourself, to think that you are small or shrunken. So do we honor the fact that we are not, in our power by ourselves? Yes. But we also know that we are expressions of God on the earth. And there is nothing humble about God, period. Ashe. Woo, I'm hot, y'all. All right. Gracious and eternal creator, we give thanks for you for waking us up this morning and giving us breath in our lungs and the activity of our limbs and a connection to Wi-Fi. Ashe, we give thanks. We give thanks for all of the deities and spiritual warriors and guides that cover us. Ashe. I give thanks for Yamaya, Ashe, Oshun, Ashe, Ogun, Ashe, Shango, Ashe. We give thanks for all the Orisha. We give thanks for our Ori, our spiritual coverings. Ashe. We give thanks for our ancestors.
So Briggs has 2 degrees from Yale, 2 degrees, one from Yale University, Yale Divinity School, and another from Columbia Theological Seminary. And she calls her African-centered form of spirituality Christian adjacent. Those logging on to the proverbial experience on Sundays are mostly Black women. Many were raised in the Baptist, Pentecostal, or AME traditions, but have since left the church and are on an African spiritual walkabout of sorts. The blending of African spiritual traditions and Christianity is not new, as good scholars like Margarita have shared with us. But what's different is where it's happening. And in public forums now and in innovative churches like Pastor Briggs here. I worked with a scholar by the name of Dr. Darnice Martin, who is Associate Professor of African American Studies at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. And she did make a comment for the piece, which is, this is why it's so important to acknowledge and venerate Black ancestors, says Martin. They were the ones who had to hide this. They were the ones who were punished for this. Now we are the ones who can be out in the public with it. Literally, we are the hope and dream of a slave. So the proverbial experience, even as one thing that didn't make it into the piece was that the proverbial experience even has a virtual church parking lot that once everyone logs off Instagram, they log on to Zoom and then they can have a conversation about the service. So I thought that was just fascinating. Okay, now we're moving on to my favorite topic in the whole wide world. I wanted to write about how sound was used in spiritual practice and how communities form around it. This is obviously inspired by my own direct experience with sound meditation, and which got me through a very long 14 months. And so I was able to include my experiences into the piece, which was a new thing for me. Here's the opening lines from the piece. As someone who lives alone in New York City, there have been moments in the past year when I felt as if I've stayed too long in a silent meditation retreat. During the early days of quarantine, the continuous sound of sirens reminded me of why this hermetic existence was necessary. I marked my early evening sitting zazen over Zoom with the Brooklyn Zen Center. And as we closed the half-hour practice with the Pali refugees chant, I could hear the clapping and shouting for first responders outside, a reminder of what extraordinary times these are. So for this piece, I spoke to ethnomusicologist Alexandra Tenus. He's the gentleman in the photo there on the left, playing the Himalayan singing bowls. He's actually researching the effects of sound on human consciousness, which is a really fascinating body of work. He's cataloging and collecting the ways people internalize sound-based spiritual practice. And the list that he's assembled is quite long. The highlights are greater feelings of self-confidence and compassion, empathy, and love, less anxiety and symptoms of depression, a heightened state of presence and awareness, a feeling of connection to our higher selves, to name but a few. So Tanis told me that sound quiets the noise of the mind. It's a reboot that shifts the noise to signal ratio, allowing the body on all levels, physical, emotional, energetic, spiritual, mental, to snap back into the original grid without the noise and without the static. So here, I know gong meditation is very popular with the multi-spiritual crowd, and what happens is you lay in shavasana while someone plays one gong or many gongs for up to an hour. And I actually spoke to Lakshmi Scalise, who facilitates the gong meditation at Integral Yoga Institute in New York City. She told me the gong will take you past your mind and you don't even know you're not thinking anymore, which is a very appealing idea in these times. The use of sound is obviously deeply embedded in the culture and theology of Eastern traditions. And so I pulled in a discussion of kirtan in the Sikh and Hindu tradition. And as it's this foundational practice in their spiritual lives. And one big note from that is that they obviously felt the energetic loss of being in the same room with one another during the pandemic, and chanting and singing and playing tabla and harmonium, all the sound overtone rich instruments. So I actually, in August, of past summer, nearly a year ago, the group that I would attend gong meditation to with did an outdoor gong meditation in Washington Square Park. And it was just quite the mix of humanity that I thought you would be interested And so that sort of wraps it up. I wanted to do a shameless plug for Religion News Association. They were doing a fundraiser to support religion reporters. You can buy your own t-shirt, Religion is Always in the Room. I look forward to hearing your comments about my reporting. It's good to be here. Thank you.